Hello, and welcome to Paranormal in Pennsylvania.
Where we discuss history and haunts.
Today's story takes us to Philadelphia, to an old war fort. My name is Sarah.
And I'm David.
Let's get into it. So today we're going to be talking about Fort Mifflin. And to be honest, I don't think I've ever heard of this fort. Have you?
No, I know West Mifflin.
Right, not this.
That's here, on our side of the state.
Yes. And so this fort has been involved in essentially every war. So it's crazy that we've never heard of it because we like history.
Yeah.
So jumping into the history, it's all coming directly from their website. So that's the source of everything I'll say in the history section. So the first use of this fort was in the Revolutionary War. And in September of 1777, the city of Philadelphia still belonged to the British, but the surrounding areas were controlled by Washington and the Continental Army. The British needed a way to get food into the city, so they attacked Fort Mifflin, hoping that they could capture it and secure a trade route. There were 400 men in the fort at that time that were, quote, cold, starving, and exhausted, end quote, but they refused to give up, understanding the weight of holding this fort. And so they held off until Washington and troops could regroup at Valley Forge and then launched a very strong defense. On November 15th, the British sailed up the Delaware River to the fort with 158 cannons on their ships. The fort had only 10 cannons, so that's a deficit of 148, but they fought as hard as they could, and it was reported that in just 1 hour, 1,000 cannonballs were fired at the fort. Most of the fort's inhabitants fled, with about 40 men staying behind and setting fire to the fort to destroy anything of use before the British could take over. They then retreated.
That's a lot of firepower.
It is, but it shows you how significant it was for them to capture it, clearly.
Right, and though the total war strategy kind of practiced, I wonder how much that impeded the British ultimately.
Yeah, it didn't say. So moving on to the Civil War, repairs were complete in 1863 on the fort, and rather than serve as a fort for the Civil War, it actually became a military prison. And the prisoners were kept in casemates, which were previously used for storage. The prison held 3 different types of prisoners. The first being Confederate soldiers, obviously. The second being Union soldiers that violated military conduct. And the third being civilian prisoners. So, all types of people here.
I assume the civilian prisoners were, Confederate sympathizers or spies?
It just said civilian prisoners.
Interesting. You don't normally hear of civilian prisoners being held at a
Military prison. That's a great point. I would bet that you're right. The most famous prisoner is William Howe, who left his regiment in Virginia to go home to Pennsylvania due to, quote, inflammation of the bowels, end quote. He was sentenced to hang and was executed on August 26th, 1864, so only 1 year after the repairs were completed. And he was the only person to be executed there during the Civil War.
Is that what made him so famous? Is he was the only one to be hung?
Yeah.
Huh.
Overall, the conditions in the prison were terrible at this time, especially by modern standards because it was 1864. There was lack of sufficient airflow, lack of sanitation, and lack of adequate food and water, leaving many prisoners starving and dehydrated.
I believe that very much so.
Yeah, it seems to be a theme in the prisons we've discussed. Go ahead, sorry.
Well, especially during the Civil War too, prisoners of war, and during the Civil War, very well recorded as being in terrible living conditions.
Right. But the history doesn't end here, because remember, I said it's basically every war. So World War I, the government decided to modernize structures to allow the fort to return to service in 1917. By this time, the fort was already a National Historical Monument, and it had served as a storage yard and engineering base. And there wasn't much on their involvement in World War II, but I'm guessing it was the same thing, an engineering base again. And in 1954, the fort was officially decommissioned after many, many years of service. The city took over ownership in 1962, and it was reinstated as a national landmark, which that national landmark status was removed when it was put back into service in 1917. So in 1962, it becomes a National Historic Landmark, and today you can visit it and tour it.
That's pretty cool. I can say that I've never heard of a location that, was a national landmark. It's removed and then it's added back in later.
I think it's because you can't be an active military base and hold that status.
Yeah, I mean, it makes total sense to me, but
yeah.
I don't think I've ever heard that before.
Yeah, and I don't know if I know of any other fort that literally has been used since before America began in so many wars.
Yeah, the engineering base is interesting. I guarantee that was probably its role in World War II as well.
Yeah. So that's the history. No doubt that's going to lead to some paranormal activity. And they actually advertise it on their website with the ability to book private investigations or attend open public investigations.
Oh, that's interesting.
There are also candlelight ghost tours. In October, you can spend the night for a Sleep with the Ghosts event.
Ooh.
So we'll keep these in mind for when we end the podcast and talk about when we go there.
Yeah, have we ever seen on a website a option to privately rent? Or to do a private investigation, I should say.
I know you can attend public ones for Eastern State, but I'm not sure if you can do private.
Yeah, this is the first time I think I've ever seen the option of being able to privately rent the place to do an investigation.
I think so.
Or rent the place to do a private investigation.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look, but I think you're right. So, paranormal investigators across the board say this is one of the most haunted places in the world. It's been featured on 4 different paranormal TV shows. Staff have said that their paranormal experiences happen at morning, noon, and night. Doesn't matter when, doesn't matter where. Teams have captured orbs of light, seen apparitions, and recorded disembodied voices. Guests at the fort have reported seeing, quote, historical reenactors cleaning their guns in uniform, but there have been no reenactors present.
Interesting. Did they mention what time period? So
no, I wish it mentioned what uniform and what type of gun.
Because to me, from just the historical background, I would imagine most of these spirits are from either the Revolutionary War, but really from the Civil War, from the terrible conditions those soldiers were in.
It might be. Typically when these people are seen, the scent of bread, baking, and wood fires happens in conjunction with them, almost as if they're on break. But that doesn't really help us pinpoint a time.
No, because even in World War I, there was likely still to be fires going.
Right. It would make sense. Another commonly reported occurrence is a woman screaming, and it allegedly happens randomly throughout the day. Visitors have claimed to be pushed or pulled by phantom hands, and guests have reported seeing glowing eyes and shifting shadows on their tours.
That's kind of spooky, but the woman screaming, I truly wonder what that was from. But I guess in my mind's eye, I see a woman seeing the state of these people and the living conditions they've been in during the Civil War, the prisoners.
Oh, interesting. I took it as maybe a nurse or something.
That's actually a very good point as well.
Yeah.
I mean, and it could have been a civilian prisoner as well.
Yeah, or a maid, and could have been from any time period.
Yes.
So, remember William Howe, one of the best-known prisoners?
Yes.
Also one of the best-known ghosts. He is known there as the Faceless Man. People have reported seeing him roaming the property, and ghost hunters have interacted with him, saying that his spirit is evil and seeking vengeance. The staff at the fort thinks that everything connected to the fort is haunted. People are cautioned not to take anything home with them. One person took 3 rocks from the parking lot and mailed them back to the fort, begging them to return them to the parking lot, as strange and negative things had started happening to this person. Upon returning them, all of the negative activity stopped.
Interesting. So it would seem that the spirit or forces that reside in the fort would like to keep everything very much so there.
Yeah. That's very interesting to me. Even The gravel in the parking lot, do not touch it.
So would that be more indicative of a curse, you think?
I think so.
Rather than like a spirit going with you?
I think so, but... Next, we'll get into the actual investigations from the TV shows. Unfortunately, 3 out of the 4 TV shows gave me that it was not available for viewing in my area. And I tried on multiple platforms, but I did manage to watch one. So, Portals to Hell is the episode that I could see. The episode starts with a daylight tour given by various staff members talking about their experiences. And a lot of times when we talk about the paranormal TV shows, they start this way. The people come in with minimal information, and they want to hear from the staff members where the significant areas of activity are. So remember, the casemates were used for prisoners in the Civil War and storage during the Revolutionary War, specifically. Casemate 5 is said to be haunted by a man that, during a lull in cannon fire during the Revolutionary War, went to check why the British had stopped firing. He had decided that it would be advantageous to hide where the British thought they were storing items, so they wouldn't suspect someone to be there. However, when he popped up to see why the cannons had stopped firing, he was shot in the head by a cannonball.
That is very unfortunate timing.
Very ironic.
Yeah.
So there's another ghost in Casemate 5, and he's called the Judge. And he repeatedly talks to women and calls them names. And I'm not going to get into the names, but you can think of what men from another time would call women of today's age.
Some very outdated.
Yes, outdated insults.
Yeah.
And he gets his name due to the judgment he makes on women. But he only whispers in the women's ears. It's not so if we went together and I had an interaction with this judge ghost, you wouldn't be able to hear him. Only I would be able to hear him.
Interesting. Do you think that the judge has anything to do with the woman's scream?
Maybe. That's a good point. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, if he's passing judgment on women, perhaps he truly passed judgment as judge, jury, executioner to someone.
Maybe. So they're led around by a tour guide, and she tells her own stories as well. So the next stop is Casemate 11, which served as solitary confinement. Now, we know from other stories like Eastern State, solitary confinement is never a good experience, and often very haunted. She tells a story of her being in the casemate on a tour when the city turned off all of the power. She's stumbling because she couldn't see, and a cold hand grabbed her elbow and led her down the stairs. She described the feeling as if an ice pack was wrapped around her whole arm.
The city... Okay, so the city turned the power off to the...
So that's what she said. To me, it sounds like a blackout. Yeah, but her recounting of it is that the city turned off the power.
It sounds more like a blackout.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a blackout.
But... Okay.
Especially an old structure.
But a cold hand led her down the stairs?
Yeah, which sounds helpful, so it's interesting.
Right, so, I mean, not all spirits are bad, right? But from the setup of this place, it sounds like it's very small hopes of something being nice.
Right, but interesting specifically for solitary confinement as well.
I wonder if it was actually with negative intention.
Oh, like, hey, come a little closer.
Yes, of coming down these stairs, get away from other people.
Well, she was guiding a tour. I still see what you mean, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good thought. They move next to the guards area, and the tour guide tells them the story of seeing shadow figures one night, and he said he sat in the guards' bunk room and verbally invited the shadow figures into the room. He says that he specifically often sees 2 shadow figures dart up and down the corridor, and he was hoping to be able to identify them. So after he invited them in and was sitting on the bottom bunk, he waited for a while. Shortly after, he had the sensation of someone climbing over him to get to the top bunk.
Oh, that's very interesting.
I know, so it's like something was finally invited in, and it just wanted to sleep.
Or it felt comfortable enough to come in.
Yeah. But he said that he only felt it, he didn't see anything, and he has been unable to identify them yet.
Yeah, I wonder if it is the case that the spirits just don't want to reveal who they are.
Right. Or maybe can't. Who knows? Yeah. We don't know how it works. So the next up, they go to the hospital building. They interview a guide who slept overnight in the hospital. And he says he woke up in the middle of the night to the sensation of weight on his chest and the feeling of cold hands wrapped around his neck, as if a spirit was on top of him strangling him. They think that this is an old soldier who died at the hospital, and the tour guide had been calling him by the wrong name. His name is Edward, but the guard had repeatedly been telling tour guides that his name was Edmund.
Classic. The classic mix-up of Edward and Edmund.
Apparently, to the degree of deserving to be strangled.
I mean, fair. Very angering.
Yeah. Based on the stories, they set up cameras and did a night investigation. In the hospital, they recorded murmuring and coughing that was not associated with the staff or anyone present. They asked for a ghost by name, but instead of Edward, a ghost named Tony came through. And interestingly enough, they think that this person was from the Revolutionary War era, as he would only talk to the female investigator, which is significant because the male investigator is British.
Oh, that'd be, yeah, that could pull some prejudices.
Yeah,
I'd imagine.
And so they didn't want to hinder the investigation, so they actually had him leave in case any of the other ghosts might have been infected, and instead, as a partner to her, they brought in a medium to work with her.
Oh, that's interesting. I appreciate the man's dedication to the investigation by saying, I probably need to bow out.
Yeah. So they go to some of the places we discussed, like Casemate 5, where allegedly the ghost of the Headless Man exists. In Casemate 5, the female investigator heard strange, unexplained noises, but that was it. Then they brought in the medium, and he identified an evil spirit there that said that it moved there to feed on the pain and suffering of the spirits that are trapped there.
Oh, that's... I don't even know if that is a spirit or so much as like a demon or something. Who knows? I
will say the interactions were pretty freaky because the medium would say something and then it would repeat the response. And so the medium said, "Did you die here?" And then he said, "No, I moved here." And he said, "Why did you come here?" And he said, "To feed on suffering." And it was freaky.
But also, like, it could have been a person. It could have been a spirit.
Yeah, it could have been.
A spirit of a person that really enjoyed the pain and suffering that happened perhaps either in the Revolutionary War or more likely the Civil War.
That's true. Yeah, who knows? It could be anything. But either way, no thank you. So then they went to Casemate 11, solitary confinement, and they sent down a single investigator. And
brave. The
investigator that was up top above solitary confinement, because the casemates are down a little, hence how the cannonball man was able to like poke his head up.
Gotcha.
So the investigator that's up top spoke to the ghosts and was telling the ghosts what to do to try to indicate the actual presence. So, for example, she said, "If you're here, touch the investigator that's down there." And she said specifically, apply pressure to his chest. So captured on the real-time camera of the investigator inside Casemate 11, he said he felt a presence and then felt sick to his stomach. When the investigator up top asked how the ghost died, the investigator reported intense head pain, which could maybe be the ghost that lost his head, but he's typically in Casemate 5. They also brought the medium to Casemate 11, and he reported hearing people yelling and the sound of ringing in their ears. He confirmed that a ghost that lived there also had his head crushed by a cannonball and identified him as Captain Nathan Stoddard.
Do we know if they were actually able to confirm that there was Captain Nathan Stoddard there during the Revolutionary War?
It didn't say. Let me give it a quick Google.
I guess while you're doing that, thoughts on that? One, I would not want to be the guinea pig. Like, please don't tell a ghost to apply pressure to my chest.
Right.
Like, how about touch his hand? Or, I don't know. Given the guard or the story earlier with the feeling of being strangled, the apply pressure to the chest feels like a very poor choice of words.
Right. I also think, talking about the physical touch, an interesting theme between them is the intense feeling of iciness. And we've seen that at a few other sites with temperature manipulation, but it's not always linked to spirits. I feel like you hear about hauntings, people say like, oh, cold patches, ghosts, but that's not been our experience in the podcast so far, that it's always linked to cold. So I wonder if it's because maybe the soldiers were cold.
Probably. I mean, it sounded like they were you said they were cold, starving.
Yeah, that's true.
I could believe all of that.
So Captain Nathan Anthony Stoddard was born 1742 and lived till 1777, where he was killed in action at Fort Mifflin.
There we go. That's kind of cool.
The American Revolution. He was with the 8th Connecticut Regiment, serving in the Continental Army. And it does confirm, historians think he was killed by a cannon shot.
Crushed his head. Oh,
but
that's
again,
cool.
When they bring in the medium on this show, specifically Portal to Hell, they don't tell them where they're taking them. So they have no way to do previous research. So unless this guy just knows that Captain Nathan Stoddard died here, that has to be legit.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the records show that he indeed was there, and then this medium's picking up somebody that claims to be this individual, and the investigator that felt the extreme head pain.
Right.
It all kind of matches up.
Does make sense.
Yeah.
So that's all the hauntings. Going back to the various ways that you can visit this place, you can, of course, go to see it as a museum. It's open for public or private investigations, candlelight ghost tours, and a Sleep with the Ghost event. So would you visit this place of paranormal phenomena, and to what degree?
So yes, I would. I would visit this place. Even though there have been a lot of negative things, I don't think I'd want to do a private investigation and try to kind of invoke some of these spirits or ghosts, whatever you like to call them. I think I would like to do like some of like the public investigations, or if we're feeling particularly bold, do like one of the overnight stays.
I think you're crazy for the overnight stay thing. As soon as I heard about that entity that wants to feed on people's pain, I was like, I can't be there without a specialist. So I would do a guided tour where I felt like, or a guided investigation where I felt like I had someone who knows more than me, because I mean, we have a paranormal podcast, but we've never done a paranormal investigation ourselves. So it would also be helpful to have someone show us the ropes. I would not do overnight. I would do a candlelit ghost tour. I think it would be freaky, but I would do that. And I would absolutely visit it as a museum. I think that's probably the most likely thing that we do. I did tell my family that I was researching this place, and Tyler at least said he would go.
Yeah, I mean, sure, visiting it as the museum, but the candlelight ghost tour also sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah. Just if anything, there's so much history at this place.
There is. Its uses in World War I and World War II feel like almost anecdotal. It seems like the main meat of the action for it happened really in the Revolutionary War and the Civil War.
Yeah. Thank you for tuning in to hear about the hauntings of Fort Mifflin. Tune in next Thursday to see what site of paranormal phenomena we discuss next.